Jo Negrini is the Chief Executive of the London Borough of Croydon. Before that, she was Head of Planning, Regeneration and Housing, and she held a similar role in Newham during the Olympic years. And gosh, doesn't that seem like another era? I thought today we might focus on some of the points, Jo, that you made in your spectacular speech when you received the New London of the Year award in 2018. And I take the view that a lot of the changes which will take place as a result of COVID-19 will be the sort of acceleration of shifts that were already taking place, or problems that we were aware of but hadn't been properly tackled yet. So I think this holds good for quite a lot of things that you said then. And first of all, you said that London needs outer London more than it ever has before. And I think that is very true today in a post-COVID environment. So what do you think will be the key impacts and the key shifts in planning in London as we come out of this crisis?
Well, firstly, Peter, thanks for the opportunity to be part of this today. I think it's interesting, isn't it? 2018 was a very long time ago now, it seems, but I do think the point around outer London is probably more important now than it was then in terms of its potential role moving forward. If you have a look at how the bigger metropolitan centres like Croydon have been treated in planning terms, they were originally set up to create, if you like, small economic hubs encircling the centre of London. And what's actually happened, I think, over the last 5-10 years particularly, is that their roles have really started to change. Our issues around in Croydon as an example of permitted development here that we've lobbied against through practically issuing an Article 4, but we were seeing a huge loss of commercial space within Croydon. 2 million square feet we've lost over that time. And what's replaced that commercial stock is very, very small units, housing units and homes for people in permitted development. And I think the famous case in Croydon is we have one unit here that's 14 square metres. So I think the whole approach to permitted development is going to be very different. It has to be very different. And to also high density PRS, which I think, I don't know how it's going to stand the test of time, but there's so much importance that going to have to be placed on the health and well-being of people moving forward, and whether that's our populations or our staff, health and well-being have to be at the heart of that. And I do think we need to think about what's happening on that permitted development piece, and particularly space standards as we move forward, and what does amenity space actually look like, and what we should be providing for people. On the commercial front, it's very interesting. The Government Property Agency has confirmed, and we're in planning at the moment for a new regional hub building as part of the Ruskin Square development for the Home Office, and talking to them last week about how is COVID changing their view on decentralisation. Their view is that it's as important as ever. And I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for places like Croydon that has office stock and commercial opportunities for commercial development, to actually think differently about being a centre that's closer to the people that generally shoot through East Croydon Station on their way into central London to work. And I do think the whole way we work, the importance of touchdown space, offices, there's huge opportunities for different public sector bodies, for instance, coming and sharing their offices. Because I know myself, looking at our main headquarters here, I can actually fit 20% of staff back into the building, which we're planning to do over the next month or so. And there's a huge outcry from my staff, as an example. We've just done a survey saying that 68% of them actually want working from home to be their norm. And I do think, I think there's always going to be a need for a blended office. I don't think we'll ever do away with office. As someone who likes working in an office, I think there's something about a ritual of office work that's important to people. But I do think there's an opportunity to refocus out of London very much as that place that could have much cheaper touchdown space for companies rather than having expensive offices in the centre of London, and actually get those bases closer to where the people commute from.
Yes, and in your New Londoner speech, you talked about how regeneration is seen negatively by the people it's intended to help. Um, I guess now is the time, surely, to reset relationships between our communities. So, how do we transfer the sort of common cause generated by the current crisis into longer term action?
Yeah, I do think it's been interesting, hasn't it, that on one level we've become very global, talking to our relatives in different parts of the world about their health and well-being through all this pandemic, but also everything has become very local. The places where people clap, the way they've gathered in their neighborhoods, the importance of the rise of the corner shop, which I've found really interesting in my area where I live, that fairly nondescript corner shop at the end of your road now becoming a hugely important resource for people in their local areas. And I do think there's an opportunity for us to really think about neighbourhoods and district centres in cities much more than we probably have before. While we lament the demise of the high street, I think we've got a huge opportunity to really think what that looks like. And I do think the health and well-being piece, and when I think of health and well-being, I think as a planner by trade, but with someone as the chief exec with an eye on socioeconomic and the importance of the relationship between economy and place and health and place and all of those different determinants that make a good quality of life for people. I think there's a huge opportunity for really think out district centres and how they work. I mean, I do think that we were moving here to a strategy around total place where we joined our council and health services up on a very local level, depending on the population in that area. And I think that strategy is so relevant now. We know what we need to be doing in particular parts of our borough. And I think if you looked at that on a grander scale and thought about how you could start, we always talked about polycentric cities, haven't we? And the importance of the metropolitan centres that encircle London, central London. But I think there's going to be a rise of the district centre. And I think it's going to need us to really think about use classes. While people are saying, what are you doing for your small businesses that are failing? I think there are a lot of small businesses we know that have gone to the wall through COVID. And I do think that we need to be thinking about how do we get footfall back into district centres to actually create the right kind of places. And that could be through a combination of public service, getting public services as we are doing to start locating in those district centres. It could be about actually thinking about touchdown space in district centres. People don't want to work in their homes all the time. People can't work in their homes all the time. Every business that I'm talking to, whether it's the NHS, ourselves, or the private sector, are thinking about working from home as the new normal, and actually virtual work life being actually part of our new normal moving forward. I think district centres and small localities have a huge opportunity, and it's a great thing to galvanise people around. Thinking about their local place and their space, not only the physical environment, all the huge changes that are happening through new bicycle lanes, extending pedestrian footpaths, all of those things could act as a real catalyst for really getting local people engaged, not only in their physical space in their districts and their neighbourhoods, but also in the services that the public service delivered to them through the NHS and ourselves. So I think there's a huge opportunity to do that and put people at the centre of that work. So, neighbourhood plans should be, I've always thought that they should be much bigger than the physical. The way in which health and well-being is absolutely needs to be at the centre of our space and planning is the new reality. And I think we really need to, it gives us a huge opportunity though to engage with people at that level where they feel so their relationship is very different with it now than it was pre-COVID.
So I'm thinking more about the local. In your speech, you said that all development should ask the question about what impact it will have on the lives of people who live there now. And lockdown has clearly made us much more aware of local areas, as you say. So um, what impact do you think that will have on attitudes to change? Will it make people more protective then,
Yeah.
therefore, because you have a large development program, will it make it more difficult to get that completed?
I think that people are going to be much more protective of their local areas moving forward as a result of that. You could see it this weekend with people enjoying their local, really enjoying their local parks in some areas. But the way in which I know in my own area where I live in Peckham, I just think there was, there was a combination of protests over the weekend and loads of people being very protective of their spaces and thinking about, um, how important it is to them, this sense of community and coming together, whether through protest or being out in their local parks. And I do think that in terms of thinking about the tension that there's going to be between people wanting bigger homes with more amenity space coupled with the development programs of a lot of developers, not only council owned but other developers. It's good. There's going to be a real need to rethink how that's done, because I do think small sites, which is where most of the suburban redevelopment is taking place in terms of housing, there's going to be a keen interest for people to try and keep densities low. It's no surprise that the areas where we were as a city the densest, and very interesting, I think, the boroughs that have been affected by COVID, Brent, ourselves, other outer London boroughs, a lot of the issues around health inequalities it's an outer London issue as it is an inner London issue. And I do think that the nature of the housing that we develop in future needs to be mindful of the fact that there is a relationship between density, population, high density population, and things. Sorry, sorry, Peter, and things like um, pandemics like this taking hold in different areas. So I do think there's going to be a lot more challenge when we're trying to increase densities, which has been the program, hasn't it? To try and increase densities in suburban areas. I think there's going to be a big challenge moving ahead with that, which is why I think we need to be engaging people on a much broader level. This is not just about more housing, actually, and I think it's always been a housing issue, intensification. And actually we need to be looking at neighbourhoods and places in the round, and the conversations around the nature of the housing that's built has to be set within a much bigger, broader context than it has been. If you take an argument to someone that says this is all about housing, it's not about housing. It's about actually trying to create the right homes for people. It's about creating the right kind of affordability for people. There's a whole range of other things, and I think sometimes it gets lost in the numbers about trying to increase numbers. But I do think that approach about neighbourhoods is going to be really important about how you engage people in those conversations moving forward.
But you mentioned tensions and inequality more generally. So in a post-COVID, post-Brexit London, are you optimistic that we can retain and improve cohesion? I mean, this is particularly relevant, I think, as we look at the terrible events happening in America as a result of the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a worrying time, isn't it? I do think the combination of we're not over this pandemic. All local authorities and the NHS are planning potentially for a second spike in this, which is the right thing to do. We've got issues with furloughing running out in the summer, higher levels of unemployment. I think is something that we need to be really thinking about what our response needs to be. And I do think, I mean, London's an incredibly resilient city, incredibly resilient city. But I do think that the issue of inequality needs at the behind, and whether that's health inequality through the pandemic or the economic and issues that we're going to have with high levels of unemployment as we move forward. You know, the bottom's fallen out of retail completely. There's a huge, you know, the issue on A3 is phenomenal in terms of the businesses that are really vulnerable now in terms of any of those places where people gather. I do think that it potentially creates a lot of problems for us moving forward. That's why I think we have to be absolutely together and engaging with people on those conversations at a local level in terms of what the future of those places look like in a post-COVID world. That is the opportunity that we have to try and make sure that all the voices are heard within the city, and that we actually plan and work with people on trying to create the right solutions for their particular areas that they hold so dear to them now. So you know, as much as I am an eternal optimist in terms of the city's ability to respond. I think there's some very loud voices that we need to be listening to in terms of both the health inequalities, everything from the impact of that on BAME communities, right through to the issues that we're seeing in America at the moment, and why that's happened, and why we need to try and restore some faith with people, and to hear their voices and act on them. So I do think, you know, in all of that, and all of those things that we've been talking about, I think there's always opportunities. You know, people keep saying that they don't want things to go back to what they were like, but to actually make sure that happens, you have to do stuff to change it. You know, it's like, oh, we don't want, you know, we'd love to work from home. Well, you need to put measures in place to make it, you know, make that possible. In the same way, we've got to do that with the city. You know, people don't want, you know, I'm looking out from my office here in Croydon and looking at a lovely, clean aired city, where I can see the Wembley Arch from here, you know, and I can see how much people are, you know, and hear how much people are talking about that they don't want it to go back to what it was. But we have to act. You can't just assume that that is going to happen. You have to intervene. You have to act to make sure it doesn't. Everything from those, you know, those small changes we're making to widen footpaths right through to the work we're doing with BAME communities around health inequalities. You've got to act so that things don't go back to what it was, that it goes back to a much better place for everybody.
Jo Negrini, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much for those very interesting points, and I look forward to joining in with you in the future in this debate about how we build back better after COVID-19. Thank you very much.